Message from the Senate, and this is the Anderson S. motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce that the Senate has concurred in and adopted the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File Number 605, an act relating to the operation of state government. The Conference Committee report on Senate File 605 is addressed to the Honorable Michelle L. Fischbach, President of the Senate, the Honorable Kurt L. Doudt, Speaker of the House. We, the undersigned conferees for Senate File Number 605, report that we have agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The Conference Committee report is signed on behalf 4 of the 5 conferees on behalf of the Senate and 5 of the 5 conferees on the part of the House. Anderson S. moves that the report of the Conference Committee on Senate File Number 605 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Conference Committee.
Recognize the author of the report, Representative Anderson S. of Hennepin.
Thank you, members. I'd encourage your vote to adopt this conference report. This bill has gotten even better from going through the Senate Conference Committee process with our fellow senators. What we did is we provided more funding for protecting our veterans. As you remember, the bill left the House here, and we provided funding for homeless vets. That's part of the Representative Bliss's bill. We also provided funding for veterans that are having to go through the court process that may be suffering from the post-traumatic stress disorder. That was Representative Detmer's bill. We also put forward some money for tuition reimbursement for veterans. And we also extended the enlistment funding that was requested by the agency as well. On top of that, we do have the provision in the bill dealing with the GI Bill. It's Representative Nash's provision, and a host of other things. But on top of that, we also provide for a new account that would allow us to provide for veteran homes in areas that are not met, their need is not met. We've heard from areas in Fillmore County, in Bemidji, and Montevideo that they are looking to find veteran homes closer to their veterans. And so that's all part of this bill. But on top of that, as we look at state government and we try to figure out how can we make it better and run more efficiently, it's a task that I take very seriously. And so as part of this, we have still the gain sharing program that we discussed through the House. We found in a situation where the agencies were not implementing the gain sharing program as it was put in place in 2011. They had not achieved any cost savings, and yet they were still handing out bonuses to employees. So we put that gain sharing program back in place, make sure that we're crystal clear in what the intent of that legislation is. We also, though, look at the chargebacks, and this is where we take some of the Senate language. What we found in the chargeback situation is that the governor's office was charging agencies for operations of their office. And some of those funds were being taken out of our roads and bridges. They were being taken out of our higher education. And a host of other agencies, and so we put a stop to that to make sure that we keep our roads and bridges and our higher education and our CGIP whole for our folks. Again, we also still have the minute consolidation piece of Representative Nash is in here. Again, this was legislation that was put in place back in 2011. We're just going to make sure that they follow through on what was the legislative intent from then. And of course, the severance package pay piece, we took some language from the Senate on just overall accountability, but the severance package piece is making sure that we're not handing out severance packages of $18,000 to people that have only been on the job for 6 months. So we put an end to that. We've got Representative Drazkowski's piece that is a huge cost savings to the state on the CGIP opt-out. It allows people that have insurance elsewhere to access that rather than having the state pay for insurance that's not needed. But then also just overall some great pieces of legislation here. We've got Representative Tama Tice and Representative Howe's legislation dealing with the sex trafficking issue in the Waite Park area and the healthy eating program that you know I've been a champion for which helps promote our local farmers and for families that need to have healthy food. That's all part of this legislation. On top of that, we also have the reforms of rulemaking that are part of Representative Vogel's and Representative Crecia and a host of other legislators that have been working hard on that so that we actually know what rules we're putting in place and putting on top of our citizens in Minnesota. So with that, that's a summary and a nutshell of what this bill does. It's a great piece of legislation. I encourage your yes vote, and I'd ask for a roll call, Mr. Speaker.
Roll call being requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Member from Hennepin, Representative Nelson M.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I think we should vote no on the adoption. I think we should send it back to the conference committee. This bill needs more work. Part of this bill that's going on is a reduction in the FTEs. And there's a lot of talk in this bill as a restriction on or a hard cap on the number of FTEs we can have. And this basically hamstrings our government. And what is an FTE? The FTEs are the people that work and make our government work. These are the people that do the actual work. From the people at our front desk here, to the janitors out here cleaning the state capitol, to the guys and gals that plow our snow and fix our potholes and do all the work that's part of we require and our residents require our government to do. And we're going to cap those at a level below what they are now. So we're going to look at laying off about 2,000 people. Because an FTE is not, each one is not an individual person. Some of them are part-time positions that are filled by multiple people. But this goes to, this bill, by putting a cap, a hard cap on the number of FTEs that we can have, the number of people we can employ, limits the work that we can do in the government and the work that our people in the government want. It makes it difficult for the agents to adjust and to be nimble. We talk about government being nimble. We talk about businesses being nimble. And this cap limits that. It kind of reminds me back when I was an apprentice. I was working on a job, so we were working on a school, the contractor I was working for, and I was a brand new apprentice. I think I'd been on the job less than 6 months. And the boss came out and came to the superintendent, who was also the carpenter foreman on our job, and asked him, if we keep the number of people you have, will you be able to get X, Y, Z done by Friday? And this was Monday early in the week. And my boss, my superintendent on the job goes, yeah, if you keep the number of people I've got on the job, we should be able to get to this point in the job and get this work done. Well, that was Monday. Tuesday morning we showed up, and I was the only other carpenter besides the superintendent carpenter foreman on the job. And we went through the rest of the week, and I was the only one there, and we didn't get to that point that he said we wanted to get to. And when he came out Friday, I said, how come you didn't get this work done? And he said, well, I told you if you kept the number of people, and I think there were 5 other carpenters on the job that day, when he asked, we would have got this much work done. But you only left me him, and he's good, but he ain't that good. He ain't worth 4 or 5 people. So, I mean, this is what we're doing here. We're telling throughout this bill, we're adding additional duties. We're adding additional things for government to do. We're telling them that you need to do this, but you got to cut your staff by 2,000 people statewide. And that's just basically, we're setting ourselves up for a disaster because the stuff that we want to get done isn't going to get done. I mean, in the minutes piece of it, we're cutting their staff, but we're telling them you got to finish all this work you got. Oh, and by the way, we also want you to do this other stuff. This bill is, like I said, we should send it back. We should send it back to conference. We should negotiate with the governor. We should look at the stuff that he wants to do. And one of the things that the governor had in his budget was dealing with the census. You know, people, every 10 years we have a census, and we all know about that. And the governor had in his budget money to start work on getting the census done. And why is that important to us? Why is that important to us? Well, in Minnesota, the last two censuses, there was this talk going around that we were going to lose a congressional seat. And why is that important? Well, we want to go from 8 to 7. Why is that important? Well, there's a lot of federal money that's based on the number of congressional seats you have that we would lose, and that we would lose in the state government, which would hurt our overall budget. It would hurt us for our roads. It would hurt us for our education. It would hurt us all over the state because that's federal dollars that flow into the state based on the number of residents and the number of congressional seats we have. And the last two censuses, because we did a good job of making sure everybody was counted, and every minority group, that people that don't normally want to stand up and say, yes, I live in Minnesota, were counted, we were able to hang on this last time to our 8 congressional seats. Well, again, they're talking that if we don't hang on to that, if we don't do the right amount of counting and the proper counting, we're going to lose a seat and we're going to lose money and we're going to have big trouble in the future going forward. So, Mr. Speaker and members, we need to send this back. We need to do a better job with this bill. And granted, there are some good things in this bill, but we can do a whole lot better for our state.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Hillstrom D.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, on page 46 of the conference report, it limits the number of full-time equivalent employees, and it caps that number at 31,691. It directs the executive branch that they should prioritize protecting client-facing healthcare workers, corrections officers, public safety workers, and mental health workers. Members, what this cap does, actually, it overrides all of the budget bills that you'll be voting on today. It overrides all the budget bills that you'll be voting on today. For example, in the public safety bill that we'll probably see tomorrow, based on that funding, you will see corrections officers in the Department of Corrections facing between 200 and 250 layoffs of corrections officers in the prison. If you actually allocate proportionally what this cut or cap would do, that would be an additional loss of 199 corrections officers. That means this total budget in the area just of the Department of Corrections, which is a high priority for public safety, would mean nearly 450 staff losses. Let me repeat that, nearly 450 staff losses. So members, this does not tell the departments what they should cut. It allows anyone to proportionally cut if that's what their agency chooses, with the legislature having no prioritization. So in the event one agency decided they could not cut, it would result in cuts in other agencies. For example, Veterans Services, not exempt. Let me repeat that, Veterans Services, not exempt. The BCA, not exempt. Those that take care of the people in the Minnesota Sex Offender Program, not exempt. So members, what this bill with that cap does is it actually says to each and every one of the chairs of this body, it doesn't matter what your budget priorities are. Representative Anderson's cap in her bill is going to trump yours.
Member from Dakota, Representative Hanson R.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I wasn't quite ready yet. I was going to speak on third reading, so, but since you called on me.
That's okay, Representative Hanson. I'm following the instructions staff gave me, so if you wish to wait. So.
Well, Mr. Speaker and members, and I see the seats are getting empty, so maybe other people knew I was going to be speaking. Following up on the 31,691, I just think of the arrogance involved in actually setting a number. And that same arrogance comes through with the rulemaking provisions in here. There's a whole article, members. I'd take a look at Article 4, and we discussed this when the bill came across, but we have a number, and I'm going to say we here as a legislature, but the majority put in provisions where not only will the legislature be reviewing the rules, but we also need to look at environmental assessment worksheets, environmental impact statements, a number of rulemaking provisions where we're taking on the executive authority. The legislature had better prepare to be in session year-round if we're going to take a look at every rule. And I believe it says that we would have the responsibility to take a look at every rule. Frankly, what arrogance is there in that, to have the politicians take a look at the science, to have the politicians say that we're not going to deal with due process anymore. We're going to rely on the political whims rather than have that process that has worked well, where people can make their case, have a statement of need and reasonableness. Let's go over that, a statement of need and reasonableness. If we have the legislature look over every rule, I can guarantee there will not be a statement of need and reasonableness. It might even be the campaign statements. It might be an interpretation of reasonableness that is based on who gave what, or who's in power, who has the access, not a statement of need and reasonableness, a statement of who has access to power that determines the decisions affecting our safety, our health and welfare, our water. Mr. Speaker, I've been actually a little stunned today when I was between bills looking at what's going on in Washington, and I think it's important to state what's going on in Washington today. Well, we're debating here about ignoring the rules, and now we want to review the rules. We have an administration that has thrown out the rule book and fired the FBI director who is investigating the President of the United States. Elected officials are not infallible, and we all have to respond to the rule of law. We have responsibilities as elected officials to be responsible to the people. Taking on these responsibilities is going to skew the outcomes away from people. By assuming these responsibilities that were with the executive branch. Now, we have authority where we can hold committee hearings. We have authority where we can talk about these things and we can bring them into the daylight. Into the daylight, not in the night. That's, I think, what Minnesotans and Americans want, is public participation, not giving us the authority and we just run with it. We run for election not to get the power to run away with unbridled power. And I fear what's going on in D.C. creeps in to each of our states. An election certificate is not a license to do whatever we want. It's a license to be responsible. It's a responsibility, not a license. It's a responsibility, frankly, to be reasonable and accountable to our citizens. So this is one reason, but I think it's a fundamental one, to send this back. I'm glad Representative Cornish is back. We were talking about the middle of the night while you were off the floor. Just wanted to catch you up on the discussion. But the process that is being trashed here is the process of reasonableness. And it's a big responsibility for us to step back from the brink here, just as nationally I hope that elected officials step back from the brink of a full-fledged constitutional crisis. We are messing around with very basic things in our government, and taking on all of these responsibilities into the legislative branch is a mistake, and our opportunity is right here to send it back. I'd encourage a no vote on adoption.
Member from Washington, Representative Ward J.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. much of what government does, much of the work of government is quiet, behind the scenes, out of the media interest, but which impact the lives of Minnesotans every day. This bill is filled with increased expectations for performance in government, which citizens want and need and rely on, but with reduced funding. Representative Nelson talked about the census and the possibility of losing a seat in the House. For every person not counted in Minnesota will lose $1,400 in lost federal funds annually. If the governor's request were to find an additional, if that request found an additional 30 people, just 30 in that census, who would not otherwise have been counted, it would pay for itself over the next decade. We need a complete and accurate population count, which also guides private investment. Thank you. Private investment in the state and informs diversity and inclusion efforts in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. The governor's proposal includes funds for just 1.5 FTE for the administration's ramp-up needed to relate Minnesota-specific census outreach and technical work that will be required by the Census Bureau for FY 18 to 21, and to support the analysis and dissemination of data for public consumption with relation to the American Community Survey. Informed projections for public needs depend on this census. Needs in education, healthcare, transportation, and many more things are dependent on a highly functioning state demographic center. To underfund this center will damage the state financially for the next decade and beyond. I encourage a no vote.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Johnson S.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a few comments. Members, according to the IBM team that provides Minnesota IT support services, Minnesota is currently at high risk of an expensive, harmful, potentially catastrophic breach of citizen data. Yet this bill provides no funding to address the immediate cybersecurity needs, cyber threats, and cyber crime facing our state. This bill, frankly, fails to protect Minnesota's personal information. There's lip service provided in terms of mandating certain things to be done, but no funding to go along with it. Yet the sophistication and the volume of cyber attacks is growing exponentially. For example, let me just cite South Carolina. That particular state government, they had their Social Security credit card and debit card numbers were stolen by international hackers via their Department of Revenue, and that occurred via just one email. And in the state of Minnesota, keep in mind we have each day 3 million hits a day at our state agencies trying to hack into our information systems. Another example, at the federal level, we had personal data and background records were breached. More than 21 million people were impacted. Again, Social Security numbers, date of birth information, addresses, all that sort of thing. And here in Minnesota, our court system was hacked into, and our court website was down for 10 days as a result of some hackers getting in. And it's not like we don't have a plan, members. We do have a plan in place. MINIT, M-N-I-T, has a 5-year security strategic plan that's been vetted extensively, but we have no funding to implement it. Members, this is a a huge failure and one of the many reasons this bill should be sent back to be worked on. We heard some of the other reasons, and they're as prominent as well, as including the arbitrary and unplanned, undisciplined slashing of our state agencies anywhere from 10 to 20 to almost 50%. And including policies such as rulemaking, as Rick Hansen said, that's not only controversial, but has all kinds of potential to endanger our environment. Members, this is a bill that is not ready to move forward. In fact, needs to be sent back. It is a failure. Please vote no.
There being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the conference report for Senate File 8605. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 75 ayes and 56 nays, the motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by conference.
Third reading, Senate File number 605, as amended by conference.
Third reading as amended by conference. Member from Hennepin, Representative Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I urge a no vote on this bill for many reasons, and one that really hits home to me and some of my colleagues. In 2015, there was an agreement made with the City of Minneapolis in regards to its Public Employees Retirement Association Fund, MRF. And those people don't just live in Minneapolis. They live throughout the metro region. And you're taking away money that you all put in place and agreed to in 2015. Republicans were in the majority. Republicans passed an agreement that gave $6 million in 2015 and 2016. And then the agreement was to go up to $16 million in 2017 and beyond until 2031. Now, my understanding is there hasn't been negotiations with the city of Minneapolis and with folks in regards to the portion that the employees are actually paying, which in 2015 and 2016 was $31 million. So what you're doing is you put an agreement in place, and now you're saying, well, we don't want to do that anymore. And it seems like you've been doing that a lot. You're making agreements with the people of Minnesota, and then you're saying, we changed our mind. And I could see, if we were in a budget deficit, that might be the case. But we're in a budget surplus. It seems like there's a moral deficit going on right now. And that's all that Republicans are trying to set this up as something that's saying, we good, you bad. And this is what we're going to run on in 2018. And you know, it's really not what Minnesota is known for, hasn't been known for, and I'm really disappointed that we have a bill like this that's cutting the people of Minnesota out. And I would ask that we vote no on this because, I don't know, maybe it'll come back. Maybe we'll have a chance to get it right, but clearly this isn't right.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Murphy E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'm a definite no vote on this bill. And I was looking through it, both the brief and then the bill itself, and am appalled to learn that we are essentially neutering our campaign finance law in this act. And for the Minnesotans who have suffered the mailboxes full of mail, their televisions filled with campaign ads, their radios filled with campaign ads, by transitioning from an agreement you signed to abide by spending limits to a pledge that's not enforced, we are signaling to Minnesotans that we are willing to spend whatever amount of money we can raise in our campaigns, meaning that Minnesotans will continue to be flooded with campaign literature, mail, radio, television, at the time at which they're asking us to do the exact opposite. I am so surprised and disappointed that with this bill, there is an effort to undermine what has been public financing and limitations on what is spent in our campaigns in a way to both allow candidates a full voice, but to allow Minnesotans a little relief when it comes to the advertising that campaigns do. And I hope that Minnesotans who are listening to this debate tonight, and I know that you are, I hope that you will let your point of view be known to the governor, that you object to this, because I certainly hear about it on the doorsteps of Minnesotans across the state every election cycle. I'm just disgusted that this is in here. Thank you.
Member from Washington, Representative Detmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I encourage everybody a green vote on this vote. As you know, my committee, the Veterans Division, falls under the State Government Finance. And this year we heard over about 42 bills that came through the division. We heard all the bills from both sides of the aisle, and we passed those bills on to the other committees. Many of these bills are in this State Government Finance Omnibus bill. We have 370,000 veterans that live here in Minnesota. We also have 15,000 active National Guard members in Minnesota. We fully fund the Minnesota Department of Veterans Affairs. We fully fund military affairs. With military affairs, we're looking at over a 15% increase over the base and a 7.3% increase over the base for Minnesota Department of Veterans Affairs. Our veterans are looking forward to the passing of this bill. And members, I really encourage you a green vote. Thank you.
Member from Carver, Representative Nash.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I encourage a green vote on this. And I just wanted to respond to a couple of the really shocking things that I heard. I heard Representative Nelson, you said, in your last criticism of this, in your great ineloquence, you said, well, we're gutting the hell out of this, your words. Well, Representative Nelson, there are people who are no longer going to be needed that we're trying to save the taxpayer money of Minnesota by just not bringing them back. And it's specific to the minute provisions, and I'm a little close to that. I get that. I'll freely admit that I'm a little close to that. But we're standing things down that we don't need anymore. And yet the DFL and Representative Nelson is advocating for us to hold on to those people and keep them on the payroll because they're good folks. Well, I agree. I'm sure they're very nice people. But if we're not using them to do the work that we need anymore because we've got ancient code that's no longer supporting things that we need anymore, do you want to keep them on the payroll? Is that what Representative Nelson and the DFL is telling us that we should be doing? Members, it is okay, as I've said before, to let some people go if we're not actually getting benefit out of the applications that we're using for state government anymore. We have a whole bunch of things that are facing the public right now. They're not going to be here in a matter of years or a matter of months, I would hope, and yet you want to advocate for them to be around. And members, I just think we're trying to be deliberate in saving the taxpayer money. You're not. Members, vote green.
The author of the bill the member from Dakota, Representative Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Glad you recognize the county. I just want to make one more comment regarding the MRF fund. For people that are on MRF, that is their pension. They do not get Social Security. I have people in my district that were employed and are under that program. I remember one of the men, he was not getting sleep for weeks and weeks until that issue was resolved. This is catastrophic, what you're doing. I just cannot believe anybody can be that heartless. The other thing I might mention about MRF is that the organization was set up now so that many of the people that used to be in that organization are in a different district. There are very few people now that are paying into MRF. They've been moved around. Again, that might be, again, some maybe legislators a few years ago doing something that they thought was right, but it had tremendous or dramatic ramifications. Again, this is an awful, awful bill. Please vote no.
The author of the bill from Hennepin, Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. There is no change in the benefits that people will receive that are part of the MRF fund. In fact, what we are doing is we are just continuing what was agreed to by the Democrat Senate and the Democrat governor in 2015. We're saying the city of Minneapolis will continue to pay their share of this, and the state of Minnesota will pay less, but the fund itself is kept whole. Those are the numbers. And folks, when you're talking about campaign finance, I think that we can put those dollars that is basically welfare for politicians to better use for our veterans, better use for our citizens of the state of Minnesota. And at the end of the day, folks, I'm with the taxpayers. I'm with you.
There being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the conference report. Members, please vote.
About time I saw you again. Okay, how are you? Oh, just great. I've been listening to
The clerk will close the roll.
discussion and debate. I like it. Hey, Joe Max.
There being 75 ayes and 56 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference and its title agreed to.